Hello and welcome. The attacks of September the 11th, 2001 triggered the so-called War on Terror. Now, 6 years on, many people are wondering when that war will end. Americans are starting to question the human cost of keeping US forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the state of alert back home has eroded the quality of life and sense of security for many. Well, keeping America safe is on the lips of the country's politicians, especially those in the presidential race. But how effective are America's intelligence agencies in the post-9/11 world? A key player in the field is Ambassador Robert Hutchings. He was the chairman of the US National Intelligence Council from 2003 to 2005, a body which represents all the agencies and acts as the think tank of the CIA. Ambassador Hutchings currently teaches at the School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. Ambassador, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Well, good to speak with you, sir. And I guess the key question is, what has been learned since 9/11? In these 6 years, what have the intelligence agencies learned?
Well, I think perhaps not enough. I think we as a country have learned a few things. Americans are somewhat less fearful than they were. I think around the Arab world, Muslims around the Arab world have learned a little bit too. The latest public opinion polls suggest that a sharply diminished number support suicide bombings and other forms of terrorism as a matter of political expression.
What about moving forward in terms of what the intelligence agencies can use, they've learned, to create some kind of map in the future to try and really improve the situation?
Well, what I tried to do when I was chairman of the National Intelligence Council is to take a somewhat longer strategic view. I'm not a counterterrorism operator, I don't know that world very well, but to try to understand in the longer sense the challenge that not only we as Americans face, but we as an international community face.
But in terms of where it's got to so far, there is a sense among many people, and I wonder if you would agree with this, that to some degree the intelligence agencies have failed to do what they should have done.
I don't know. I think in a narrow sense, the intelligence cooperation among agencies in the U.S. has improved pretty dramatically. Intelligence cooperation among countries has improved substantially since 9/11. So I think we're on the right track. But I think I always saw this challenge as much more than one that can be waged with military and intelligence means. It's really a civilizational challenge.
There was an issue, though, of the administration, the current administration, perhaps not paying enough attention to the intelligence reports they were getting. And I gather that even the first estimate you wrote on the Iraqi insurgency wasn't even read by the president, and a lot of that information has been ignored, perhaps.
Well, I think, first of all, policymakers have responsibilities that those of us on the intelligence side don't necessarily have. So I fully understand that when I was on the policy side, and I spent more of my career on the policy side than I did on the intelligence side, I often ignored intelligence reports as well. So I understand this game. I do think there was a certain level of unreadiness to listen to bad news, and we were telling some pretty unpalatable news, especially at the beginning. I think that's changed substantially since then. The situation has evolved.
Do you believe that the country has been made safer because of the actions taken, the fact there's been no other major attacks since September the 11th, 2001, that the policies, or at least the actions taken, have worked?
I think America is safer at home. So I think the steps, the costly and sometimes disruptive steps we've taken at home have made us somewhat safer. Not perfectly safe. We will never achieve that level of perfection. I'm sometimes asked, this isn't quite the question you asked, I'm sometimes asked if we are winning the war on terror. And my answer to that question is that we're all losing that war. And I think above all, Muslims in the Arab world are losing that war. So there's something that all of us as an international community have to pay a lot more attention to.
What is it that Muslims should be doing? You know, not just in the Middle East but around the world. What is it about you know, the problem that the Muslim world faces that it's not handling correctly?
Well, one thing I would hope to see, and this is something only Muslim opinion leaders can do, is to clearly repudiate the terrorist methods that are being employed, and to recover this sense of Islam as a religion of peace, of tolerance, of multi-ethnic urbanity, if you like. That is the Islam that most Muslims that I know would like to recover, and that has been, let's just say, challenged.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think there hasn't been the kind of moderate voice, certainly at the sort of leadership level, that there should be?
I think there are some real political and economic grievances that Al-Qaeda and others have been able to exploit. I think it's important to break that link between the message of jihadist extremists, if I can use that clumsy term, of Muslim extremists and radicals that would resort to terrorist activities from those many Muslims who have legitimate grievances against the United States, perhaps, against their own governments. So the latter grievances need to be addressed, but the message can't be suicide bombing.
Ambassador, I'll put a couple of questions we got. We had quite a good response from our viewers in terms of sending emails in advance to ask you questions. Interesting one from Sami in Egypt, which says, I've heard that US intelligence agencies don't take native Arabic speakers in their ranks, even if they're US citizens. Why is this? Is this one of the reasons that the US intelligence is so bad? Will this practice ever change?
We certainly do take native Arab speakers into our ranks, not in the numbers that I think are needed. There's the obvious security issue. The more perfect one's Arabic is, the more interesting friendships, family ties, and others that tend to go along with it. My own view is that the U.S. intelligence and U.S. government generally needs to take a more sort of broad-minded view for the sake of bringing into our midst a larger number.
Because there's a generation issue. If it's like first generations, there's more suspicion or something, I would guess, because of those ties.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so there was actually, it was an interesting issue, a subject that came up here now. An email from Gunvor in Copenhagen in Denmark. Many experts have stated that the key to ending instability in the Middle East is to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Yet it seems that intelligence and the media alike ignore the facts on the ground in that place. It seems that US officials don't have a clue on the injustices happening there, do they?
Oh, I think so. This is a very long and very complicated story that's been well told. I would say it is a key, not the key. I fully understand that for many Muslims in the Arab world, this has become the issue of humiliation, of grievance against the West. But I think in a realistic sense, it is one of many issues that need to be addressed down the road. I'm gratified that the U.S. administration is now engaged in trying to find a Mideast peace solution.
I was interested to read how you said that that the USA is back to paying no attention to Palestine because we don't like Hamas. I mean, that's got to be a factor, surely.
Well, I think it is a problem, and this is a challenge of how to deal with Hamas and Hezbollah, organizations that have, let's say, mixed agendas. They are political players on the one hand, but they are also active supporters of terrorism on the other. And it is a challenge not only for us, but for the Danes and for many others to know how best to engage such groups.
Obviously, the situation in Iraq complicates things. It's not really helped America's image overseas, which also complicates the whole intelligence picture. And an email that we had from Mogo Warren in Juba in Sudan says, will the presence of the US military in Iraq bring an end to the terrorist network in the Middle East and the world at large? What's your opinion on that?
Well, the short answer is no. I think we're now already in a different place. I mean, we are beginning to move into a different phase in our engagement in Iraq. Whether it was right or wrong to have gone in there is now too late to change. But I think now, based on the president's trip and commentaries from outside of government as well as inside, we are moving toward a different phase of U.S. engagement. The issue that concerns me more is not whether we should have done something differently before, but what do we do next?
So what's your opinion on the way the US has its relationships with certain leaders in the Middle East? Obviously that complicates the picture for Arabs. They feel there are friends and there are foes. And sometimes the friends of the USA are considered foes within the Middle East.
Well, it sort of cuts both ways. One needs to deal with leaders that are there as a matter of producing some sort of regional stability. On the other hand, we would like to see Americans would like to see a certain evolution in a more hopeful, progressive, and open direction in the Middle East. And I might just say that one of the dangers of closed societies is that the only opposition force that is potent is the most radical. I saw this in Egypt when I was there a few weeks ago, that the moderate opposition has been pretty much excluded from political life, leaving the opposition totally to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is not healthy for Egyptian future.
On the subject of Islam, an email that we had in from Sri Lanka from Amin Izzuddin was an interesting one. It's looking at the CIA. It says, I believe the primary task of the CIA is to make a bogey out of Islam. During the Cold War days, the CIA made us believe that every communist is a devil incarnate, and now it makes the American people believe that the only good Muslim is a dead Muslim. How do you view that?
First of all, I'm not a career intelligence official. I spent a relatively few years in this. I really don't think that's quite right. I always thought that the intelligence communities were able to produce pretty sophisticated understanding of Islam, of the Middle East, There was some wonderful work done on political Islam as a global force that did not adhere to the sort of the caricature that I just heard.
I do find when I talk to people who are well established in the community, intelligence community or in the administration, and they travel, they tend to be much more aware. But it seems that that image and the perceptions about Islam in the Middle East don't filter through to the average American.
There I agree with you, and there I think it really is a matter that the United States public needs a better understanding of this vast and diverse world from Southeast Asia, where the practice of Islam is just very different. I visited Indonesia and then again India when I was in this job, and I think the diversity of Islamic practice is not well understood in this country. And I think the reverse is true, that in the Arab Middle East there is an insufficient understanding about what this country is all about. So we all have some work cut out for us.
Well, so one more email that we got from Walter Sen in Zurich in Switzerland says, unfortunately, the White House drew the wrong conclusions out of this terrorist attack, 9/11, and started two conventional wars, which is rather pointless against a network of terrorists. How do you estimate the damage done to the U.S. reputation due to the White House's wrong reaction to 9/11, according to this viewer?
Let me answer this question a little bit indirectly, if I may, because I think we are now at a place as a country where we have a different understanding of the challenge before us. And I believe there is an emerging foreign policy consensus that would take us in a somewhat different direction in how to meet this challenge in all its dimensions. That means in terms of development assistance, diplomacy, cross-cultural relations, and many others, and away from a kind of a way of thinking of this in primarily military terms, which may have been appropriate immediately after 9/11, but no longer is.
Now, you don't think there's any bridges burned along the way on this, to finally reach this new consensus on foreign policy? You don't think there's been so much damage done that it's going to be a hard sell?
Are you suggesting that they don't all love us still? There is some work to do, and I think, leave aside pointing the finger at what's to blame, America's image around the world has been badly eroded. Partly it's our fault. And I'm not just speaking of the administration here. Partly it's the fault of those around the world who are taking a rather singular view of the United States. I think this needs to be fixed. I think we need to pay a lot of attention to how we understand the rest of the world in the first instance and how the rest of the world understands us.
Now, how is that attempt to create a better understanding complicated by the fact that issues such as Iraq are ongoing? You have those who say that the going into Iraq was wrong, and now there's the fear of what do we do about pulling out of Iraq? The U.S. administration says this.
Well, as I said a few minutes ago, I think we will soon be in a somewhat different place in Iraq, where the U.S. presence will be, if not drawn down, at least reconfigured in a way that lends itself less to the feelings of occupation, and that would then give an opportunity for us to refashion the way we are seen around the world. And I'm not talking about a PR blitzkrieg. I'm talking about a sensitive, sustained effort at cross-cultural dialogue with a willingness to listen as well as to be heard.
What do you think has forced that change of heart? I mean, I know when you appeared in the documentary on the Iraq War, No End in Sight, you were actually making the case that the U.S. policy in Iraq has been disastrous. Do you think it's the pressure of people like yourself who've been on the inside and know both sides, speaking out?
Well, I think that where we are in Iraq speaks for itself. We've found ourselves in a very difficult situation, and we're going to have to sort of reorient ourselves toward a different kind of approach to this region. I think now, on the 6-year anniversary of 9/11, is a good occasion for reflecting on where we stand, which of course is the purpose of your program. And this would entail, too, I think, a much more long-term, variegated approach to the challenge posed by international terrorism, which is as much a threat to the Arab Middle East as it is to our country.
So where do you see the next steps being taken? Where do you see the axis of, rather than the axis of evil, the axis of integration and perhaps some consolidation of views and some common ground?
Well, some of these have already taken place. Some others may have to await the next administration. The things that have already taken place in this administration are a much greater reliance on diplomacy, an effort to patch up, to restore good working relations with our European allies. And I might just say that the visit of the French foreign minister to Iraq was enormously helpful. Not that he is going to agree with U.S. policy, he's probably not going to, but his France being back in the picture is enormously helpful. So there's those steps. There's the strong re-engagement of Secretary Rice in the Middle East peace process. So I think we are beginning to move in a hopeful direction.
So if we have this conversation 10 years from now, what sort of picture do you think we'll be looking at? Can you look that far ahead in the crystal ball?
I'm Not quite, but if you ask me where I thought we'd be at a year from now, I'd be hard-pressed to be optimistic. 10 years from now, I am hopeful that we will be in a very different place, and not only because of steps we may take on our side, but steps that Muslim opinion leaders and Muslim political leaders will also take to avoid having this challenge of international terrorism turn into a clash of civilizations.
Now, is the leadership there? Because we have the issues, people are saying that the US already still has issues with Iraq, with Iran, with the Syrians.
Well, the issues remain, but let me answer it in a slightly different way. The current issue of Foreign Policy magazine contains the results of a survey of 100+ opinion leaders in the United States, and I was impressed by the bipartisan foreign policy consensus reflected in that report, because they polled people left, right, and center, and there was a pretty substantial consensus around what I would say is a more moderate, variegated approach to this challenge.
Can you see, looking ahead, and we all know this, and you traveling as much as you do, sir, the quality of life certainly has changed for people living in America. The security going through airports, the state of alerts, a certain climate of fear. Can you see that ever changing in the near future?
I think it's changed already. I think it's important for other countries to understand that why 9/11 was such a shock to this country. Except for those few Americans who were there for the War of 1812, Americans haven't experienced this kind of attack on their own territory before. Most other countries have experienced it. So it caused a terrific shock around the country and a deep-seated desire to become safe again. I think we are now at a place where Americans, A, feel safer, and B, understand that international terrorism has been with us, with the world for a long time, and will be with us for some time to come. We'll have to learn to live with a certain degree of fear. And I think we are already in a better place.
Well, Ambassador Robert Hutchings, I thank you very much for being with us, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us for the show. Don't forget, if you have any thoughts about pressing issues around the world, just send your emails to riz@aljazeera.net. We'll see you next time. Street Talk's coming up next.